As for the aspects of diversity and ethnicity, come to this project because it's another clue, and it's to what we could do. It's Moriyama and Toshima's Multi-Faith Center at the University of Toronto. And what's interesting about this project is that it was designed, in the words of the people at the University of Toronto, to accommodate students of varying faiths various faiths to come for prayer and meditation. So you can burn sweetgrass, you can burn incense, you can pray, and you can do all kinds of activities in this It's not designed for any particular religion in mind, but it's designed to serve many kinds. And these glass-clad onyx slivers sort of fold open for storage of prayer books, for storage of all kinds of material, and it's operated by the students at the University of Toronto. So you wonder, how can that be transferred to the public realm? And you start to see that maybe it can be in ways that are much more subtle and much more sophisticated than we might hope. Rather than building the Mughal-inspired shopping mall, which is important because it addresses a need, a commercial and demographic need in Brampton or Mississauga, in the western part of the city, this is another aspect of a new kind of facility that addresses another kind of need, which is intergenerational. A lot of times, the big problem that municipalities have is how do we keep, the 27-year-old woman who works for IBM in the same suburban community as the 45-year-old family and the 85-year-old grandmother. And what a lot of municipalities in the Greater Toronto area are doing are building superplexes. So they'll build a library next to a gym, next to the pool. There's an economy of means associated with that, of course, but it also allows you to take your grandmother, have her hang out in the morning, play mahjong in the library, or read a Chinese newspaper. If she doesn't speak English, which a lot of the older generation may or may not, she could go to those terminals at the far end and someone can help her take out a DVD or a book in Chinese on screen. And if you work at a library, you'd be able to find it, you'd be able to use it yourself without even knowing Chinese yourself. The building is designed with feng shui principles. Has lots of natural ventilation and lots of natural daylight and low glare, so if you're all kinds of people can read this at all age groups. And of course, it's very cognizant of understanding of the Chinese community. Over next door is you have, all kinds of facilities where the daughter and the grandson can kind of play in one particular facility. And this was used and also partially supported by the Chinese community of Markham. So it shows of a civic institution designed in a quiet way to be very responsive to the Chinese community. Similarly, you see a lot of developments that are starting to happen in these suburban regions that are also understanding of a specific demographic dynamic that occurs within certain ethnic groups. In this case, again, Markham, this was primarily geared for the Chinese community because it's precisely what I mentioned a few minutes ago. The 27-year-old buys the condo up on the 7th floor, goes and works for the Royal Bank of Canada. Her older brother or parents might live in these townhouses, and that second building on the right is an old age home where grandmother can live. You can pick up your grandmother, you can all head down to 10 Rentee and hang out, and of course, don't forget to get some vitamins for your grandmother too. But the thing is that you're trying to recreate a sense of density and community because a lot of these growing municipalities are very desirous of having people that work, live, and retire within one area, not move downtown and back again. It's a way to build economic sustainability, but fed within, in this case, and it's very explicit by the town of Markham, but fed through the intensity that occurs within the Chinese population that comprises a big percentage of that 65% visible minority for the town of Markham. And then you start seeing reconfigurations of public squares as a result. Brampton is another interesting case study because here they initially planned to build a hockey facility. But in Brampton, where 58% of the population is visible minority, and of which at least 2/3 of that are South Asian, they don't play hockey as much as they play cricket and soccer. So the city of Brampton changed the program built some cool super graphics of soccer balls and everything else, and had this whole new facility for indoor soccer with an outdoor facility for cricket. And here you see, a lot of the members of Brampton, the new Canadians of Brampton, using something that's an empowering form of architecture. It's not a cheap community center. And of course, the kids can do what all kids do, which is to smoke cigarettes after school while their moms wait in the houses behind, wondering where the hell they are. And so they take good care of the building because the building was designed for them. It was designed with a sense of pride and a kind of an architecture that's both attractive. It's not like earth-shattering, paradigm-shifting architecture, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we often see in more mediocre buildings in the suburbs. This is the landscape of Vaughan, or you have this kind of landscape, which was designed with one of those Oxford geometry sets, I think. And this is not Photoshop, it's real. But I don't know how you balance that image with this image all within the same municipality. And then, of course, you have the standard and very vital aspects of any community, which are sort of community-supported, not just banquet halls, but assisted living centers and community centers. But how do you recenter that? How do you refocus that? And this is still under construction, but it's Kubar, Payne McKenna Bloomberg's Vaughan City Hall and Civic Center, where you try and bring all these disparate elements together. You might say in your head, it's like, good luck, right? How can you kind of bring that together? But you have to start from somewhere and refocus the town's attention to recreate something more identifiable within a suburban context. There's another image. So this is Vaughan, but this is also Vaughan. And it is an example of how a community is coalescing around one particular area, and this is the Ahmadiyya Muslims sect grouping that came to Canada, I guess maybe about 30 years ago, and they're a little bit they kind of were not always wanted in certain parts of the country, and kind of certain parts of the world, I should say, reassembled in Canada and tried to actually focus a whole subdivision, in a sense, around the identity of community, an idea, i.e. the mosque and community center, etc. And it was very successful in what they were doing. It's not like if you're not Muslim, it doesn't mean you can't buy a house there, but it's primarily focused for the members of the Ahmadiyya community, and hence Ahmadiyya Drive, Mosque Gate. But they actually had a hell of a time getting that mosque built because the city of Vaughan was loath to give them building permits because they were fearful that the height of the dome would, make other general population uneasy with the presence of this large religious building. I guess it's not that dissimilar to the Swiss holding a referendum against the building of mosques in Switzerland. So you have the mosque that was built, and then you have these photos, these paintings, which I thought were extremely sort of telling, more telling than many photographs that you'd see. And it's by Martha Lien, a Toronto artist who did a residency in the Ahmadiyya community. She's not Muslim by any stretch of the imagination, and she tried to convey through paintings what she had seen. And what she sees, of course, are a lot of colorful garbs worn by women. Of course, you also see the isolation that you see in any typical subdivision, but through all that alienation, you often still see glimmers of hope, such as the minaret through to new urbanist kind of houses. And the lesson there is that even though the community wasn't the most architecturally articulate in building the right kind of mix of a home, a bunch of detached houses doesn't necessarily community make. They did design it around a religious facility with the intent of bringing people together through a commonality in their background. I think that's notable and an interesting lesson to be learned. Toronto, I show this series of projects and mutations because there are other interesting lessons about how to be implicit in your way of understanding diversity. This was, for many of you are familiar with, this is Ray Moriyama's Japanese-Canadian Cultural Center. It was originally opened in 1964, a real sort of seminal building in mid-60s Canadian modernism. And when the Japanese-Canadian community moved out of this facility in 2001, it was occupied by the Noor Cultural Center, a Muslim-based organization. And how do you kind of take a Japanese building and turn it into something that's not Japanese? And so they add in some Islamic calligraphy in the lanterns. Japanese lanterns now become a different kind of a beacon towards reference to God and light. The screens, the Japanese-inspired screens of Ray Moriyama on the top that were also placed on the bottom were also replaced by Islamic-influenced designs and with typography and whatnot. And the Japanese Canadians moved down the street to another suburban location, and this time, the Japanese beacon is reconfigured and inside you have, Kembo and all kinds of. This was in some ways one of the global competitions that they had in this building, and it becomes a place where a community can gather and stick out your tongue and all that stuff too. But it's a reminder of another building that Moriyama Teshima did, also in Toronto, and it's called the Japanese Buddhist Church. No, that's why Buddhist Church. It's kind of a bit odd, but the history of that community in Toronto is a bit unique. They were downtown, but followed that traditional migratory pattern that I mentioned, heading northward, and they wanted the architects to build them a new church, a new place of respite, a new place of meditation and community. So the outside, buses are scrambling by, it's a busy place, and then you turn to the image on the right, and on the inside it's a much more Zen place to be. And not just as a Zen place to be, but it's also a very busy place to be, where two old friends can have a lunch together with a lot of other elderly ladies, and the kitchen can just be crazy as it wants to be, all within the confines of one building that seems very neutral on the outside, and maybe neutral and only further contributing to the neutrality or the neutrality of a suburban idiom that we all are so apt to critique. But on the inside, it remains a very lively place to be. This project is very interesting, also takes place in Toronto, but it's by a recent University of Toronto student who came up with the idea of understanding intergenerational movements within family and how home businesses and needs can change over time. Immigrants Do Not Simply Settle was the title of her thesis, and it won a Canadian Architect Award of Excellence, and it's sort of notable for a variety of reasons, but when you start and look at the housing stock that you see in the suburbs, this is what you see. When you start to analyze it, you start to understand that there's opportunities for home businesses over time. That if you start with this basic housing, the semi-detached house, 2 cars in the front, but then you start adding, then the other parts of your family get involved, as families want to do, no matter who you are, where you come from, and you start to develop opportunities for more family to live, more businesses to occur, more economy as you see the piggy banks growing, more economic activity to come out of a traditional suburban model, more land use intensification, again, more piggy banks, well actually still 2, but maybe the second one is much more full, more cars dealing with traffic, and you start having to understand how do we deal with street parking, how do we just encourage land use intensification. But the point is that these kinds of activities, and this is another instance that she had done with one of these strip malls to kind of activate it through the Festival of Light, is to develop a sense of community, and a sense of community within sort of the leveraging the assets that we currently have in 2010 in our Canadian cities, right? Which isn't always a lot, but we've got to work with what we've got. I show in conclusion just a few examples of maybe some more hints of where we can go that are not Toronto area but are elsewhere. This is Aberdeen Centre in Richmond by Bing Tom Architects, and as you see, it's like that Remington Centre or like the next evolution of the Pacific Mall in Markham, but it's primarily an Asian mall. But as you see, the way the units are sold, strata titles for the shops as well as offices. People buy these places like condos. Incidentally, that's how that specific mall was started. People don't rent their shops, they actually buy them. And they're actually there's an element called green boxing, because the size in which the units were divided up and how they were sold qualified at the time for the Canadian government's policy about how much money a private investor should invest into Canada in order to get Canadian citizenship. So the architecture was modularized specifically to existing immigration policies at the time. And it's sort of something to think about how you can tie in other architectural, urbanistic elements to existing policy to help facilitate that conduit. It's a bigger discussion, but things to think about. So Aberdeen Centre, which is a sort of slick mall, all your SUVs parked outside doing your dim sum, a go-go, going crazy, but still in behind, it's still associated with a resolutely suburban environment. One project I find particularly inspiring is David Adjay's idea stores. There were several buildings that he did in East London, and here he builds these beautiful taut curtain walls that are a bit inspired off of the kind of shopping bags that you see in a lot of these market areas around the world, and catering to a lot of a host of a South Asian population and tend to be middle and lower income inhabitants in the area of East London, but a place of pride. So as you can see, there's it has these elements that contrast to the more dingy or more now apartment buildings that were done in the 60s, the housing estates, but enliven it with a place of learning, a place to bone up on your resume, to learn reading, literacy skills, English as a second language, et cetera, financing, loans, and still a place for markets to occur outside, and as well as in this idea store below. It's almost like having your formal gesture to the city above and your informal opportunities for mutation to occur below, i.e., maybe low economic barrier of entry for market stalls and businesses to occur on the ground floor. And of course, you see the banks of the city in the background. But you have this intervention, which I think is a really nice juxtaposition between the capital A architecture, the formal elements, and the more informal bits behind. And I look at this, there are documents that are starting to circulate, and I'm trying to keep tabs on a lot of them. Some of are more impressive than others, and I thought this one, it's actually a very modest publication, but it's a very impressive one, and it was done last year by the City of New York, called New Yorkers for Parks, and it basically starts to look at aspects of New York City parks that can be used by a wide range of citizens for a wide range of uses, both festivals, recreational activities, things for children, better interpretive signs in different languages, and to just be very aware of understanding that, New York, Toronto, Montreal, we're all in the same boat. We all have increasingly a number of foreign-born people that living in our cities, and I think it's time that we try and digest that and leverage it so that we can become a more 21st century park. That we don't amble through park under American oaks with parasols like we're in Central Park in 1884. We have to have signs, come participate in our Playground Association program, and it's written in Chinese and in English by kids, and other areas where they play cricket, or the Hispanic Americans selling wares in the park, and you have to be able to understand those different functions and celebrate them, even if they're kind of lowbrow. Because if enough lowbrow elements are connected, you have a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift starts to indicate a richer urban environment that begets a richer architectural response. So when you see this photograph, I mentioned we saw this earlier, I kind of very sincerely very hopeful about it, because there's a lot of indicators and a lot of movement that are occurring within this banal environment that are very critical to our future. Mother and son, understanding a new way of life in this once God-forsaken place of the city. How do you make something exciting out of it? You have community newspapers, you have commerce, you have business, you have a multiplicity of activities. In effect, you have a city. And so we as architects have to take that city and make it more beautiful by recognizing all the elements we see in this photograph and creating something even more. So that's my discussion, and I thank you all very much for being very patient and listening away, and I just hope there are lots of questions and comments from the audience. So thank you all very, very much for attending.
Thank you. Right at the beginning of your presentation, you had a photograph of Karachi Bazaar, and you said that that could be anywhere in the world. This picture could have been taken anywhere in the world.
Correct.
I would doubt so very much myself because, having traveled to places as far afield as Ecuador, Romania, Poland, South Korea, I very much doubt that first and foremost that the PAN, because the advertising said PAN, Pakistani newspaper, you got to have a community that demands, these consumer goods. And they're found in places, like Canada, United States, possibly England, a couple of countries around the world. But I would say that the vast majority of countries in Latin America couldn't possibly, have such a business in operation. And a lot of countries as well. Saudi Arabia, could you seriously consider, that kind of a, store to operate from Yemen, Sudan,
Right. Well,
Chad?
It's a very. I'll qualify that point because it's an important question you're raising, and to address it directly, when I say anywhere in the world, the issues that the underlying issues, is to recognize a multiplicity of activities that are happening in your view frame that might relate to another group that's embedded somewhere. So in the case of Dubai, it could be, what about the Sri Lankan workers that are living in Dubai? They can't afford Gucci or Hermes at the mall, so you go around back behind Jumeirah Mall, and there's going to be another kind of an operation that will be addressing their needs. You go to Ecuador, it could be another, it could be an indigenous, or it could be, you go to Peru, and it could be, it's what it is, it's really a matter of recognizing that the world, if the world has various needs that respond to their, each grouping's background. So if you're living in, so it's about a store or a service that can respond to, if you're living in Dubai and if you're Sri Lankan, there's going to be a store that's going to operate to your needs. If I walk down the street and I'm in South America, and there might be a Uruguayan store in Peru, because there's a bunch of Uruguayans living in, it's about addressing the needs. And it's not about the aesthetic, it's not about the quality of the brick, it's not about the quality of the mullion. It's about understanding that cultures transfer and demand, we all need a place to call home no matter where we live in the world.
But I think there's a big difference between, let's say, an engineer, from Sri Lanka who would work in Dubai on a temporary basis, and this person understands very well that he's never going to be holding a passport from that part of the world, a Dubai passport. He'll be a guest worker, and the nature of these, businesses is very temporary, as opposed to Canada, where people will obtain a Canadian passport, and they could be, they could strike roots.
The bottom line is we all need, it sounds really cheesy, but we all need a place to call home. We all need a place to identify with. Most of us do anyway. We're not all such global souls we can eat, doesn't matter where we go, we don't care about where we come from. But people come from somewhere and they go to somewhere else. And when they go to somewhere else, they still want to be reminded of who they are and what they are, whether it's a religious institution or a commercial area. It could be a very crude building. You can go to the Sudan and find a different roof structure than you'll find in West Africa, that you would find in Southeast Asia. But you're going to need a place that you're going to identify with when you call home. And I think when you have that cross-fertilization happen, it's when you as a designer, as a planner, need to kind of see where that trajectory might lead, and how you may not necessarily need to design the right kind of brick for it, but you can anticipate that process to maybe facilitate a design outcome from that need for a place to call home.
Bonsoir. Je voudrais déjà dans un premier temps vous remercier pour cette conférence que vous avez donnée, qui était très intéressante. Je parle pour moi à titre personnel qui ne savait pas au préalable vers quel genre d'innovation en fait on partait au niveau de l'urbanisme.
Mm-hmm.
Et j'ai trouvé déjà ça très intéressant dans un premier temps. Ma vision et ma question pour ce soir est finalement sur le sujet qu'on a longuement parlé ce soir, sur l'urbanisme, sur finalement tout ce qui est multiculturel. Est-ce qu'on ne serait pas tiré vers quelque chose qui existe déjà en Europe, voire dans plusieurs autres pays qu'on va dire, je vais citer peut-être la France, ou peut-être les pays de l'Est, ou autres pays justement d'Europe, je ne vais pas trop rentrer dans les détails. On promet des choses finalement à des personnes qui ne peut-être ne reçoivent pas ou ne recevront ça jamais. Est-ce que c'est peut-être ça finalement vers ça qu'on tire? Est-ce que tous ces projets vont finalement avoir lieu dans le futur, ou toutes ces personnes vont vraiment toujours rester emprisonnées? Parce que je ne pense pas qu'ils vivent vraiment en Toronto, et je pense qu'ils vivent vraiment dans un autre monde.
Mm-hmm.
Moi, j'ai vécu plusieurs années à Paris, c'est ce qui se passe aussi pour plusieurs personnes qui vivent à l'intérieur de la ville de Paris et en périphérie, à l'extérieur.
Mm-hmm.
Donc, ils vivent dans deux mondes complètement différents. Et je pense que c'est vraiment ça qu'on retrouve ici, ce tout style. Pas forcément au niveau des échanges, mais juste au niveau du décor.
Oui.
Quartier par quartier qu'on a fait, le décor changeait complètement. Les financements qui étaient mis en place par rapport à chaque quartier étaient complètement différents.
Mm-hmm.
Alors, est-ce qu'il y a finalement un favoritisme par rapport à certaines communautés ou pas? Je ne sais pas. C'est peut-être une question que je me pose.
Oui.
Est-ce qu'il y aura peut-être certains quartiers qui vont avoir accès à certaines choses que d'autres n'auront pas finalement? Est-ce que le budget va être le même pour chaque personne,
Oui,
chaque quartier?
Est-ce que je peux répondre à votre question en anglais juste pour
Oui,
faciliter?
en anglais, vous pouvez
faciliter
répondre en
le
anglais parce que
discours en
je
général.
comprends l'anglais. Je ne peux pas
Ouais.
m'exprimer à 100%.
D'accord. Non,
Mais
je
je comprends
comprends
l'anglais.
très bien votre question, et votre question est une question très juste. Et c'est une question qui est très difficile à répondre pourvu que le monde change tellement rapidement. Et puis, en ce qui concerne les communautés européennes, ils ont beaucoup plus de misère à intégrer ou adapter à des besoins des communautés diverses qui entrent en Europe présentement. Alors, okay, I'm going to just in English because it's a little just for everyone. It was a very interesting question because part of the question I'll extract was that part of in Europe it's a very different condition about adapting to immigrants, and we see I've seen some very interesting case studies they're very Europeans are very curious about what we're doing in North America because I think we are much more pluralistic in our urban planning. Maybe it's a result of the fact we don't have the same sophistication of urban planning on the suburbs. Maybe it's also a result of the fact that the types of immigrants and communities that we have in Canada are often fairly do have access to finance and capital, and some of the European ethnic groups are more marginalized socially and economically. So that's part of the reason. So when there are that's why we can build a $40 million Hindu temple in Toronto with no problem, but trying to get a $100,000 or €100,000 upgrade to a disused part of a facility outside of Oslo is a much more difficult question. And never mind, Aubervilliers or Seine-Saint-Denis and all these areas outside of Paris. There's no hope in hell. The French like to talk a lot and build beautiful planning catalogs and do very little to empower some of the communities in the banlieusards. So in Europe, there's a few examples of trying to be more accessible to jobs, and the Finns and this have been very good about new immigration from East Africa in Finland, in Helsinki in particular, they've been very good about upgrading social services and buses to make sure that they don't become ghettoized. Because in Sweden, they've had a different case study, right? I'm just looking at some of the northern European countries. We have never had a policy where we say, the Canadian governments have more policy about what cities you go to, but not specifically about what areas of the city you have to settle in. And that's helped prevent some of the ghettoization of particular communities. We tend to say, well, we'll let them decide where they go based on the social capital that they have. And I think that has actually been allowed them to be a little bit more self-organizing and entrepreneurial. And I think the state has been able to pick up on needs by neighborhood basis, based on a need of the community, not the need necessarily of the Somalis or other groups, although they're stressors on the system. So I think it's it's a very big question, but it's a tougher question to ask. I think in some ways we've been much better at absorbing different ethnicities and allowing them to express themselves in residentially and commercially, because we're, unlike the French, we don't necessarily have the stigma associated with certain types of ethnic groups. Or we're used to a multicultural grouping. Might have been German and England and Protestant and Catholic, even those subtle differences, French, English. We're a little bit more culturated to groupings of society than more homogeneous European countries are. So that kind of gives us a little bit more history on it. But we just hope, and I mentioned this last slide. The province of Ontario, for example. Not sure about the province of Quebec; it's a little different here. But province of Ontario has actually mandated municipalities to develop specific cultural plans relating to. One of the criteria is multiculturalism and diversity within the community, as a way to anticipate future planning needs. Not saying it's a very well developed or sophisticated thing, but at least the governments are asking municipalities to acknowledge this and to incorporate it into their cultural plans, with the implication of urban planning, a positive urban planning outcome. We'll see.
Une dernière question. Je ne sais pas si j'ai bien compris par rapport à tout ce qui a été dit. J'ai plus ou moins eu l'impression qu'à un moment donné, vous avez parlé des bâtiments qui ont été mis en place par le système pour accueillir tout ce qui est religieux ou activité,
Oui.
qu'autre que la religion. Et on s'est rendu compte par rapport aux photos que la communauté comme la ville n'était pas sur ce même piédestal, dans le sens qu'ils mettaient des activités, comme on avait dit, ils ont été remodifiés pour mettre du soccer ou autre chose. Donc est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui vont déjà au préalable aller voir les communautés pour essayer d'en parler, pour savoir vraiment de quoi elles sont attirées, ou c'est juste des personnes qui essaient juste de faire du business et mettre des choses en place sans forcément savoir qu'est-ce qui est sur place ou comment ressentent les choses des personnes qui vivent sur place.
Yeah, it's a very the issue in Brampton with the soccer facility is because the community was very vocal in saying, we want soccer, we don't want hockey. The city said, well, so many people are coming out, it's important for us to address the needs on the condition. We will make it a soccer facility, and we will ask the community to help program the functions to make it a successful one. So it's a very interesting partnership. In the case of Markham, like the Chinese woman in the library, the Chinese community helped financially with the city to develop a bit of a public-private arrangement to help manage, to make the community much more successful than the town of Markham was even able to afford. So while we talk about some of the lower, you can never underestimate the fact that a lot of communities in this country have the financial wherewithal, not just the political organizational skills, to improve their surroundings. The bigger question is, how can the cities be more accepting of basically gifts from the community, whether it's money or intellect, that the cities need to be more prepared to accept these inputs to make the environment better. And if you can create a better dialogue, you'll have a better result. That's on the positive level. The negative level is to say, oh, I don't know what this is, I don't want it. I'm not going to give you a building permit. But I think cities can no longer ill afford to be negative about it, because they realize that when people come, they create businesses, they create jobs, there's an economic sustainability factor that's very important to the cultural diversity of growing communities, certainly in the greater Toronto area.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, there's good questions.
Is the beautification or let's say the capital going towards shopping malls and religious institutions necessarily leading towards a kind of intensification of the ghettoization of these communities?
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, if a shopping mall is but ugly, if a shopping mall is really ugly, can it somehow kind of create a kind of chaos that could be positive in terms of diversification?
Yeah, well, I guess it's you're alluding this to kind of an optimism that I have, in the sense that it's better to have some commercial development and a momentum going than nothing at all, because maybe in a few years the chaos that you talk about, or the mutations, will occur, that mall will be ripped down or replaced by something else or something better, maybe a capital A architectural resolution, or something that's more holistic in terms of the public space around the mall, that it's not a hard parking lot. I sort of the shopping mall and religious elements are very easy buy-ins for people to understand as catalysts for urban evolution, and that we are hoping, I think all of us should be hoping that they will breed richer landscape urbanism elements, or just landscape architecture elements. I don't like keep using landscape urbanism, but they'll breed better, more effective landscape and architecture in the future as a result of them just being there. Because when they're there, they become a catalyst. The momentum gets built, community grows, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you very much, Ian, for the very alluring lecture.
Thanks.
I had just one question that goes back to the 70s. Basically, I'm thinking of Christopher Alexander and his criticism of the developments in the 70s, in which he alluded always to developers, for example, and the bankers being responsible for a lot of the unsustainable and terrible strips and environments that were created, well, at that time and even before.
Yes.
And of course, he was talking about the idea of user participation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was looking at, in the presentation, there's always some of the examples that you showed that show an inherent action of the developer, who is basically the person or persons who are in charge of the whole project or projects. Mm-hmm. How would one deal with that? And I think in your last two questions you answered that when you refer to the cities taking a certain attitude that is very critical when adjudicating sort of contracts and dealing with permits and things like that. But I'd like to sort of ask you a little bit more about it.
Okay, thanks, Ricardo. Is that you, Ricardo? Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Of course, I can't see from the glare, but there's only one person that speaks in that authoritative voice, and it's Professor Ricardo Castro. Thanks. A very good question, and what I would sort of point to the example that Mughal-inspired shopping mall really comes to mind as a really good example of how a developer can actually become a bit of a community leader. I don't know if this is a question you're asking, but it's a element. This is this guy. He's a Sikh. He moved from Vancouver to Toronto. He's like a loud guy, wears a loud checkered jacket. He's got a cell phone in one hand and a global phone, BlackBerry, in the other. And he's just this crazy guy, but he believes that that the Sikh community was sort of severed during the partition of India and Pakistan, and he wanted to bring them back to one unified community in Toronto. I mean, it's kind of touch, and so he wanted to build it next to a Gurdwara. He bought the land from this other guy. He wanted to build a community together, and maybe the aesthetic was need some refinement. Maybe it wasn't the most, could have held a competition. We don't know what he could have done. But the point is, he did something where he tried to actually introduce public art, tried to have a sense of memorialization for the Sikhs that were turned away on the ship out in Vancouver in the early part of the 20th century. He tried to have a sense of community around that development. And you look at that and it's going, okay, he's on to something here. And he achieved some success, and most importantly, he achieved a lot of success and support from the Sikh community in Toronto, which I guess really in some ways is good business. But on the other aspect, it's also a good way to entrench the community in the city. And it earned him a lot of points from the municipality as well. So the short answer is that a developer could ride that groundswell of support within his or her own community, leverage it with the city, and come up with some very exciting results. And we just hope that stuff continues, I guess. The flip side is less attractive, right? So
I just like to thank. It's really a pleasure to have had this as an introduction for this series. I think that there are some questions that you raised very, very important. The last one on the idea of a kind of self-reform of an economical model in place through economical development, developer, urban planning, and on the other side, the participation issue will be a crucial question. Will touch a lot of a political and social organization of our society. And with big question, I leave you. I hope to see you soon at CCA in the next series of lectures. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. Thank you again.